Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Mr. Revesz, pleasure spending some time with you in my office earlier in this week. My first question is for you. One of OIRA's most significant functions is its centralized review of, quote, significant federal regulations, which impact millions of Americans. Similar to elections and election administration, I believe our democracy works better when there's greater public engagement from all groups and a broad range of relevant stakeholders that can contribute to, in this case, government processes, not just turning out and voting. I believe this should also apply to the regulatory process. So what populations do you think are currently underserved by the way the regulatory process is functioning? I know you've done some research in this area in the past.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think it's very important that in addition to having aggregate estimates of costs and benefits, we understand how regulations affect subsections of the American people. It could be farmers, it could be business owners, it could be workers, it could be people with asthma or other respiratory illnesses, because not everyone is affected by pollution or by other consequences in the same way. And it's very important to understand that. I don't think the regulatory process has done a particularly good job at disaggregating this information. And I think for a while that was because the techniques for doing that were not available. I think they've improved significantly since then. President Biden has called for this work to be done as part of his modernizing memorandum. I've written about some very simple improvements that could be done in the regulatory process, which is, for example, to look at the distributional consequences of different alternatives to a particular proposed rule and not only to the rule that's actually proposed. And we look at alternatives to determine, in connection with the determination of aggregate costs and benefits, but we have traditionally not looked at alternatives to determine distribution. As a result, we can't make the best decisions that could be made. I would, if confirmed, I would very much want to work with the agencies and with the OIRA staff and get advice from members of this committee on how best to make sure that we have the most sophisticated understanding of the disparate impact of both the adverse consequences that regulations seek to address and of the regulations themselves on different groups of American people.
Well, I appreciate your thoughtfulness on this and already coming forward with some suggestions or recommendations on how to improve the process and, frankly, make it more equitable as a result. I know some of my colleagues, Senator Peters, Senator Sinema, and others have talked about the process for modernizing regulatory review, recommendations to revise Circular 84 specifically, so I won't be repetitive on those items, but did want to associate myself with their concerns, their questions, and their prioritization. In the time remaining, I'll turn to Mr. Shriver. And this is a little bit of a follow-up to questions from Senator Rosen on the topic of, she was specific to cybersecurity, sort of workforce concerns in general. And I want to weave in two items I've spoken, or I've asked questions of from your colleagues that have come through the committee for consideration before. Talk specifically about the need for STEM talent as we recruit, as we retain workforce, and diversity within that cohort. And yes, I'm proud to speak as a graduate from MIT with a mechanical engineering degree, trying to up the ranks of STEM talent on this side of the dais. In May, the Senate passed my resolution expressing the Senate's support for increasing the number of Latino students specifically and young professionals entering STEM fields, not just in the private sector, in the public sector as well, and at all levels of government. Latinos make up 17% of the overall workforce in the United States, but represent less than 8% of the workforce in STEM fields. The federal government is the nation's largest employer, with hundreds of thousands of STEM employees. So I'm interested in helping federal agencies fill the needed positions with qualified, diverse perspectives from various backgrounds. Mr. Shriver, would appreciate any thoughts you may have on how to build a more diverse STEM pipeline and workforce for the federal government.
Thank you, Senator Padilla, for your question. And I think you've put your finger on a critical issue for the federal government. We absolutely need to have diverse pools of talent, pipelines of talent into federal positions. We have been meeting with colleges and universities around the country, including HBCUs, MSIs, and what we're hearing from them is, number one, that they would like to see more recruiting from the federal government, but number two, only if that recruiting actually leads to real positions. And we have had a real drop-off in the number of interns that have been brought into the federal government. So one of the priorities that I've been working on in my current role under Director Ahuja's leadership is how can we reinvigorate our early career talent hiring. And there are multiple ways that we're working on that. We did implement some streamlined hiring authorities that had been enacted under the previous administration for post-secondary interns and college graduates. We are taking a fresh look at our Pathways program, which is the primary program that agencies use to hire interns and recent college graduates. And we are working on new guidance on paid internships. Under President Biden's executive order on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, he directed OPM and OMB to issue guidance to agencies on how to increase the number of paid internships and decrease agency reliance on unpaid internships, which of course are obstacles to participation in federal opportunities. So I look forward to OPM with OMB issuing that guidance later this year, and we will continue to engage with the communities to make sure that we're living up to what the law requires, which is the federal government should be recruiting from all segments of society.
Great. Thank you very much. Look forward to following up on both of these items with both of you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.